Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
And welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these very critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. It's becoming more and more obvious to me, and I think to many, many Canadians, that Pierre Poilievre's biggest enemy is Pierre Poilievre. I know we talked about this during the election campaign, and I think it really kind of came home to roost when we saw the election results, of course. And now Poilievre's running in a by-election, which he's probably going to win. But some of the things that he has said and done, I think pretty much run contrary to what a lot of people, even conservatives and people in the Conservative Party, were hoping to see, which was a maybe not necessarily a chastised, but a more mature, level-headed Pierre Poilievre coming out of this whole situation. I don't see that happening. There's no evidence to that. Case in point is the recent Calgary Stampede, where all the political leaders, the Prime Minister was there, and Poilievre, and of course they all wear the Stetsons and they make their speeches, et cetera, et cetera. And Poilievre, during his comments at a couple of different speeches he made during the thing, basically went all the way back to the same talking points that he used previous to the federal election, during the federal election, seemingly unaware and oblivious to the fact that Canadians have already said, we don't care. Canadians have already said, no, you're not our guy. Canadians have already said, nay off the character assassination and let's talk about policy and practicality. It's the same old Poilievre. He's not more humble. He hasn't seemed to have learned any lessons from losing not only the general election, but even losing his own seat. That's why he's running in the by-election. As a matter of fact, a couple of very respected political pundits and columnists, Brian Lilly and John Iverson, both of whom I've had on my radio show many, many times, great guys and very insightful, have both written pieces about their perspective and their observations about Poilievre during the Calgary Stampede, because let's face it, everybody was out there, right? And basically said that Poilievre's reception from the Calgarians and those who were attending the Stampede was kind of cool at best. Even the Conservatives themselves, I think, are having second thoughts about this. I know there's going to be a leadership review, and I don't know what's going to happen with that. And there's the by-election in which he's probably going to win. I think everybody kind of concedes that that's going to happen. But I think a lot of Conservatives that after the election, we're looking at Jenny Byrne and others and saying, boy, these guys really screwed up. A lot of them are now turning their attention and say, yeah, that was a problem, but he's a problem too. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is going to be the end of Pierre Poilievre politically and that they're going to dump him like the NDP did to Tom Mulcair after he lost the 2015 election that everybody thought he was going to win. But I think there's a little more concern now within the Conservative caucus and Conservative Party itself about Poilievre, basically because the guy just doesn't change. He's, as I mentioned at the beginning, seemingly his own worst enemy when it comes to these sorts of things. And he made the same sort of comments in the last little while, too. He's, again, going on to the rhetoric about Carney and about this and that and not qualified. And maybe the most recent one had to do with Mark Carney's blind trust that he set up. We all know that Mark Carney is a pretty wealthy guy. He didn't inherit it. He worked hard for this. Yes, he went to, all the Oxford and Harvard and got his degrees, but he's earned his money. He became really smart and very capable financially, which is why he became the governor of the Bank of Canada and later was recruited to be the governor of the Bank of England. He's worked on boards, a number of them, Brookfield and so many other places like this, and also worked in many capacities under the G7 too. He's a wealthy guy, and God bless him, he's earned it, and he's got that kind of money. So what happens when you become the Prime Minister? Well, you don't want him looking after his own portfolio, so he set up a blind trust. And we are told that he had complied with the ethics commissioners. As a matter of fact, met with them on different occasions, and not only met, but exceeded many of the rules and regulations set up for blind trust. So he figured, okay, fine, that's going to happen. He's not going to manage his portfolio. Somebody else is going to do that, and he's just simply going to be Prime Minister and run the country. Well, Poilievre's got to stick his nose in there and say, yeah, but what if? What if Poilievre is really concerned about his own portfolio instead of what's best for the country? Or what if he's going to make decisions as Prime Minister that are going to benefit him? And again, it's all in the hypothetical because there is no practical reason or any shred of evidence that was going to happen. But that's what Poilievre loves to do. He loves to raise the speculation, yeah, but what if? Look, Mark Carney, whether you love him or not, and a lot of Canadians seem to really like the guy based on the polling we've seen, and I can understand why. He's not Donald Trump, okay? I mean, Donald Trump turned the friggin' White House into a Tesla dealership a couple of months ago to try to appease his buddy Elon Musk. He basically sells Trump memorabilia at gatherings. He still has political rallies, and of course, and he's selling his own stuff, basically selling the Trump brand and making money from it. That's a conflict of interest. What Carney is simply doing is saying, look, here's my money. Somebody else is going to manage it for me, and I'm going to simply run the country. And to suggest that, well, he's going to make a decision based on whether or not he's going to gain more wealth from it, I think is not only speculation, but I think it's insulting to the character of an individual like a Mark Carney and so many others in this country that would consider themselves that as prime minister to simply use that vehicle to try to improve their own wealth. I mean, it's a ludicrous example, and Poilievre is raising it simply because he's trying to cast doubt and cast shade on Carney. And maybe there's a certain element of his base that are going to eat that up. But I think most Canadians are simply shaking their heads and saying, Poilievre, get off it, would you please? Really, let's get on with running the country and doing the sorts of things that we elect our leaders to do. I think, inevitable that Poilievre is going to be back in the House of Commons. He's going to win the by-election, and he'll be back there. And, of course, back in question period, et cetera, et cetera. But is he going to be the sort of person who's going to put Canada first? Or is it simply going to be, I want to further my own political career, and if it means doing something to try to discredit Mark Carney as an individual and to question his ethics, then maybe I can score political points. It's a rather petulant and quite frankly, I think, bothersome attitude, but it's the attitude he's always had. He's always been this guy who, from the time he was a backbencher under the Harper government to finally, he got a job as a cabinet minister, and when all the A people had left the cabinet and gone on to other things. So, somebody had to fill the seat, I suppose, so it was Poilievre. But I think the mindset of most Canadians has turned out to be not the sort of guy that we'd like to see as the leader of this country. And I think Canadians spoke loud and clearly about that in the last federal election. But Poilievre can't let it go. He's still going to start shooting at Carney, not about policy, because a lot of the stuff that Carney is talking about are things that the Conservatives talked about in the election. Not because he's copying the Conservatives, as some of the pundits or Poilievre would have you believe, but because of the sorts of things that Carney believes in. Study the guy. These things that Carney is talking about doing right now are the things that he has always wanted to do. They're the things that other Liberals have done in the past. That Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien and others who have led this country to financial wealth and stability have followed policies very similar to what Mark Carney is talking about right now. The problem we have with there's a whole generation, I guess, of Canadians right now that are colored by the last 10 years of Justin Trudeau's government and thinking, well, that's how Liberals act. Well, I'll give you a historical reference to that. No, they don't. Trudeau was an anomaly. Took the party way too far to the left. Even Liberals would tell you that, and didn't seem to have any sense of fiscal responsibility or economic development that is so necessary for Canada's wealth and for Canada's ongoing growth in economic and, of course, social aspects. And Carney is that guy, and Canadians, I think, have accepted that. So for Poilievre to simply be gearing his energies towards still trying to shoot holes in that argument, that Carney may be below that ethical standard that's needed for a prime minister, is ludicrous, frankly, and without merit. And at the same time, I think it really begs the question, is that all you got? I know you're the opposition leader, but at the same time, are you going to start acting like a responsible politician and a mature politician and addressing the issues? As the Prime Minister has talked to us about, and I think most Canadians concur with, we are in a crisis situation. We're dealing with a crazy man in the White House who changes his mind whimsically from day to day, sometimes hour to hour, about tariffs and other things, defense spending and pulling out of NATO and the G7 and the sorts of things he wants to do against Canada and many other nations for that matter too. We need some cohesive leadership here. And yeah, you may be on the other side of the aisle from the people that are governing right now, but you're a Canadian first. But if you're a Conservative politician first and a Canadian second, then you shouldn't be in Parliament. Nobody should be. It's about time that we started pulling together. Poilievre just doesn't seem to get that. Never has really embraced that message, that sometimes you got to put your differences aside. Even Churchill, back in World War II, the 1940s, 1939 to 40, when he became prime minister, his cabinet was made up of people from other political parties because he wanted a coalition of Brits to try to battle what was going on economically, but also obviously militarily. I know, I'm reading some of his memoirs about this. Yeah, he had some second thoughts about that. Thought, boy, these guys are a bunch of idiots. But he tried. It was the right thing to do. Now, I'm not suggesting Carney has to do that, but what I mean is there has to be an effort on both sides of the House to try to get this working. And we saw that recently, just before Parliament broke up for the summer with the passing of Bill C-5. Andrew Scheer, who's the House leader in the absence of Poilievre, voted for that, got his party to vote for it. And I think you may all remember that classic picture just at the end of that session where Carney actually walked across the aisle, shook hands with Andrew Scheer and said, "Thank you for getting this done," because it was in the best interests of Canada. Poilievre doesn't seem to get that. He doesn't seem to understand that sometimes you have to set partisan politics aside. He's all about partisan politics. And by the way, it's not lost on me, and I think on a lot of other Canadians too, that it's pretty rich for a guy like Poilievre to be questioning ethics of a guy like Mark Carney, who's shown absolutely no indication that his ethics should be questioned. I mean, Poilievre, this is the same guy that will not go through a security check, notwithstanding the fact that just about everybody else who sat on those committees who is aspiring to leadership has done the very same thing, which begs the question, what's he got to hide? And what's he got to hide about his own finances? I mean, we've seen the stories, and we talked about this during the election campaign. There are some stories that indicate that Poilievre's wealth is over $25 million. Some people deny that. Others are suggesting, yeah, there's some merit to that. I don't know which one's true. I find it rather amazing that a guy who's only been an MP all his life, since just a kid, is all of a sudden worth over $25 million. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's 10 million. Maybe it's 5 million. I don't know. But he's got a lot of money, too. And I don't hear him disclosing or sending things into a trust either. Politicians run a very, very dangerous road here. I mean, because you're going to be criticized left, right, and center, no matter what you do, no matter who you are. And that's part of the game, and I think most of them understand that. But if we're going to nickel and dime people that seek public office and attain public office, and the best is simply going to say, you know what, I don't need that crap. And we don't want that. We need people like Mark Carney, who have those qualifications, and others who have come before, that are willing to step aside from a rather successful enterprise in private enterprise and private business to say, I'm going to give my abilities and my talents to try to improve Canada. And we have a long list on both sides of the political ledger that have done that. Poilievre still wants to play small ball. He wants to play minor, petulant politics. And I hope and pray that Canadians are over that, and that they'll simply look at a guy like Poilievre and say, look, get in the game. All right. We haven't got time for your little petulance and the little small petulant talk that you want to talk about with Carney or whoever is going to be on the other side of the aisle these days. We're better than that. And we deserve better than that from our elected leaders. And if Poilievre doesn't get it, well, I think that speaks volumes about his political future in this country, because I think most Canadians do get it. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks so much for being with us. You can pick us up, by the way, if you're just joining us. Great to have you. We're on all the platforms where you get your podcasts, and we look forward to your not only your participation, but also your feedback on this. I always look forward to your comments and some suggestions as to what we might do on future podcasts. Keep those coming. They're great, and we really do appreciate that. Thanks, as always, to Madeline Kelly for the great work putting this one together. Until next time, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.